Okay, the meeting is in live stream. All right, and let me just lower that. So in case, because sometimes when I do the YouTube live, it wants to, there's an echoing effect, and I'm not sure what that is. It happens sometimes,
Okay.
it doesn't happen. Because I guess there's like Zoom and YouTube are syncing, and there's like a delayed.
A delay.
Go and turn
Gotcha.
YouTube off, like, but it's recording because it'll tell me that I'm live streaming.
Okay.
All right, so that's happening. So there's an echoing effect, and I'm not sure what that is. So that's what it is. So I turned that off. We are live, and now we're recording.
Awesome.
All right, so we're going to record. Perfect. I think I'm finally getting more professional. I'm getting the hang of this, Miky, because this is all this tech stuff is so new to me, and I have resisted. And I know you are really, really good at getting people up to speed. I see we've met on the morning meetup with David Shan's program. And you're really good with the tech and the AI and the links and the blogs. And it's just amazing. I watch you and I said, one day when I grow up, I want to be this guy.
I try to keep up to speed. I try to keep up.
Yeah, because I admire that about you because you haven't resisted it,
No,
within
I'm all for it.
Yeah, within my age range, I resisted it. I'm like, I don't need that. I know how to talk to people. And I started my business during the time where there was no social media. I started my business back in 2001. So there was no social media. I mean, it was like you got mail was like the big thing.
All right, listen, I'm right there with you. Right there with you.
And it took me a while to even get an email account. I was like, I don't get it. I get letters. I write a letter. I was so old school with all of that stuff that I know I always had the resistance because I'm like, oh God, this is another thing I got to learn how to do. So even like the group that we're with, the morning meetup, there's a lot of talk about how to utilize digital media. Hence, this is why I'm here doing these interviews, because I meet some of the most fascinating people. And what I have seen is that if everybody's like, I'm making 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, we're making all these figures, and I'm like, that's nice, but it doesn't, for me, the reason why I'm doing live with Akyiaa Live is because I meet people that are interested, they're doing such cool stuff, and it's not about the figures that they're making or not. It's about the person themselves. It's like, presenting that to the world and letting the world see that I could relate to that person. The young man that came last week, I had people reach out to him. He needs to come to my city and bring that program he's talking about because the kids really need it here. So just for people to be able to reach out and see what's available to them, other than it sounds like you're like the circus barker. I make 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, come on down, ladies. It sounds like that after a while. And that seems to be the only thing. And there's more to life than that. So that's part of the reason why I want to bring on people like yourself that are just out there doing, it's like interesting people doing really interesting and extraordinary things in this world. And that's the whole point of this show. And to also let people know what's available for them. So let me introduce you a little bit. From what I understand, you have a background in finance, media, and entrepreneurship. You went from a childhood where you were struggling to going to Wall Street. You worked in film, TV, publishing, music production, and all forms of media. And you now have a organization that you formed called the Peoples Republik, which is for, let me get it right here. It's a Urban Startup Accelerator to help people that are disadvantaged to know what it is to start a business. So there's so much that you do. And I'm going to really let you select and just tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you got started into all of this that you're doing.
Sure, sure. First, thank you. Awesome to be here and have the chance to share a little bit about my background. I am super inspired by the content that you're producing and just the platform and what you're making available. So, super excited to kind of have the chance to connect on that in that regard. But a little bit about me. So, my origin story. My two parents, West Indian background, originally from the Bahamas, but my parents are
Jamaican
both.
here.
All right.
Yeah, game on.
But and that's another contributing factor in terms of the entrepreneurship lens. I think my grandfather was an entrepreneur, my grandmother was an entrepreneur, my
Same
dad was an
here.
entrepreneur, and so you see, especially the immigrant experience where you're coming into a social construct that you don't always have access to traditional means of jobs and infrastructure.
Have
Sometimes
susu.
sometimes yeah, because you're depending upon the community. And so
Yes.
I was very familiar with the tenets and principles of entrepreneurship as a child. I always saw my grandfather, he was a restaurateur. He had a couple of restaurants in Miami, Florida. My grandmother used to have like fashion boutiques where the ladies of the neighborhood would come and be able to try on their hats and all the different things. And so you see the impact of entrepreneurship, especially in the public service industry, where at that time, people of color didn't always have access to the same restaurants, the same boutiques. And so having entrepreneurship in the minority community provided an incredible service, which in a little bit kind of brings me full circle in terms of what I'm doing now. But in between then, my mom was a single parent. It was me and my sister. She had health struggles quite often, and so a lot of times it was a struggle growing up, and a lot of times we were homeless and out of doors and familiar with the
Wow.
shelter system and just all
Wow.
the things that come with being, whether you want to say disadvantaged, at risk, whatever the term is, but being in that population where you're struggling a little bit, made me really focus in on finance as a career. So I went to school for economics. I came out and ended up on Wall Street as a stockbroker.
So
And
let me back you up a little bit.
sure,
So
sure.
the pain that you have of, single mom, um, facing homelessness, facing lack of resources, your solution was like, I am going to figure out money because that was
Yeah.
that pain. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just, and could I say one more thing? I said susu, and for those listeners out there that don't know what susu is, could you just explain that, and then we back up with your Wall
So
Street?
yeah, so actually it's funny you should bring it up, because it's really, there's these concepts around community economics or circular economics, and it's a concept that on a national level, where you look at Asian communities, Southeast Asian, Indian communities, they keep the dollar in the community to rotate in the community. And so you see that at play in a lot of communities. And in the West Indian community, it is, Asusu is almost like a group mutual fund. And
Mhm.
so say for you, so say for instance, you've got a mutual fund, it's an investment vehicle, and then the benefit of it touches different parts of the community. So it's a literal group mutual fund, but in a very manual sense. And the very, like, usually it's family members or close friends of family that participate in this group economic platform where they contribute, and each week or each month a different member of the community gets to benefit from those contributions. And usually it's an opportunity for families to do things, whether it be acquire a piece of property or get a car or something you ordinarily wouldn't be able to manage on your regular income. It gives you the opportunity to kind of click up in that regard.
Yeah, and I remember my mom used to do that with her job. She worked, in the hospital system in New York, and lots of Caribbean people working there, and they would have
Mm-hmm.
a susu on her job, and so that's how she paid her college tuition. She never took out a loan, but she'll put money in, basically you'll put money into this pot, and then you get to have your draw from that pot, like
Yep.
it rotates and you go around and you get to draw out of that pot. And then, then you keep putting money back in the pot for the next person to have the draw. So
Community
that really
economics.
helped
Yeah.
her out a lot. That's why I said, that whole background of an entrepreneur, you have to get those resources somehow.
Yeah.
So we're back to your Wall Street. Like, how did you manage, going from all of this, taking business and then landing on Wall Street? And as a Black man, probably in the time you landed there, how was that?
So, one thing, and it's a lesson that I've learned again and again over my career, but you have to walk through the door. And that's exactly how I got to Wall Street, is just continually walking through the door. A lot of times you have to seek out the opportunities. So I sought out a program in high school. I was at a program. It was a magnet program in Miami, and they also had a sister program in New York. So I attended the program in Miami and the program in New York in high school. And it was the Academy for International Business and Economics. And so that facilitated certain, number one, just awareness, and having the banking and investment awareness and information in high school gave me a little bit of an advantage. It got me certain opportunities. So I was able to intern at certain Wall Street firms while in high school. So I had that exposure, I had that resume. So that was a benefit. And I should also mention my uncle was a broker. He worked at Merrill Lynch when I was a kid. So I had that example. Like, I saw him do well, and I was like, "Oh, what do you do?" He said, "I'm a stockbroker." And so I'm going to do that.
That will solve this issue with the family. I need to do what you're doing. I got it.
It's like, straight away, I just knew.
Like a no-brainer, yeah.
So I made the decision early on. So that probably would be another key, is never be afraid to decide soon. Like, if you can decide, if you're 15, that's what I want to do, whether it be art, creative, finance, science. If you key in and start making those opportunities early, by the time you get to college, you'll already be keyed in. By the time you get out of college, it'll be a wrap. Like, you'll be locked in whatever you're doing. And those early years, like, being so focused, by the time I was 20, actually I was on Wall Street, because I went to school for 2 years, but I'm studying. So just being real. So I'm studying while my family is struggling. And I was like, I'm out of here. I went to Wall Street 20 years old, dropped out after sophomore year. And by the sophomore year, I was making $100,000 on Wall Street. It just was like, I literally urgently needed to support my family. So I headed out early.
And I have to say, that's a very Caribbean mentality, because I remember my mom telling me the story that when she came here, she worked as a domestic and put herself to school, but you have to send money back home. So you had the same, even though you were living here in America, you had that same dilemma. Like, I need to send money to my family down south because, they need it. So that I could see how your decision was informed that way.
Yeah. So I left school early. By the time, I remember, because I would be at the firms and everybody would go out drinking, and I wasn't even 21 yet. So I couldn't.
So you were the young Black guy, because I remember Susie Orman talking about the challenges she had as a woman on Wall Street. So I'm thinking, young Black male on Wall Street, that must have been quite a challenge. Also, you could go out and drink and hang out and rap.
Yeah. I mean, you go through all of it. Like, you go through all of the racism, where you're showing up and you're going to the meeting and you're like, oh no, they're like, no, messengers go around that way. And I'm standing in a Brooks Brothers suit. Like, I'm kind of not the messenger, but whatever. But you go through it.
And you just laugh at it and brush it off and keep going.
Yeah. Actually,
I have had this happen to me where I have walked into a room and they're expecting Dr. Azula to show up. So, there's this young, tall, white male with me, and he's a student. So he wants to come to the event, and they'll walk up to him and shake his hand. Hello, Dr. Azula. And they'll look like, no, she's Dr. Azula. And they'll go like, oh, I know, yeah.
Yeah.
The messengers get delivered back there. That's priceless. But that doesn't stop you. What I find is you don't hold on to that. You're like, I'm here because I've got to support my family.
Yeah.
So all of that doesn't even matter.
Yeah, you let it go. You let it go. But all in all, I have to say, it was a great experience. I got to do some really cool things. I think, again, whether it was getting the opportunities or staying in the opportunities, I think that I don't know how to describe it other than like that rambunctiousness, that direct focus of this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, carried me through in terms of just succeeding in that space. But I think all in all, it was a good time. Like I was able to support my family. I was able to be a young person and enjoy all the things of New York that you want to enjoy. So I had a good time in that regard. I eventually, I'm a creative person, so I left the finance world to go into, initially I went into publishing and then film. So I worked in publishing. I worked with Russell Simmons on One World Music Beat. He had a magazine that gave a platform to his portfolio of artists for Rush Communications. So I did that for a while. Then I eventually ended up in advertising, working for big Fortune 500 clients and doing like global campaigns and that sort of thing. And have done that solidly for like the last 15 years.
Nice.
For the most part, focus on pharmaceutical and healthcare advertising. So a lot of the global health awareness initiatives where marketers want to, make sure that the public has information about a certain disease state or disease indication, working with like global commercial and information or educational programs. So that was awesome as well. It kind of got to feed a different side of just my need to do something large and relevant. So that's been like the last 15 years. But last year, you come to a point where you are looking at concepts of legacy and how to contribute to the next generation of folks or young people. And so I founded the Republic, which is a venture capital firm with the intent of initially just raising capital for new and up and coming entrepreneurs. But at the top of the years, I started mentoring certain entrepreneurs and founders and aspiring entrepreneurs. And what I found was there was a deep information gap, just in terms of knowledge around process, knowledge around information and resources, knowledge around infrastructure and the means to actually build a business from the nuts and bolts aspect. So I started the Peoples Republic, which is a segment of the Republic that's focused on an accelerator. So really the information repository for resources for aspiring founders looking to build out a startup, focusing primarily on digital startups, specifically because there's so much opportunity for scale in the digital space. Whether you look at online digital content models, or software as a service models or digital service models, there's a lot of area for scaling in that space. I happen to also have a background in tech.
Let me just start in case someone doesn't know what scale. I just learned what scaling was like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, because it's like, since I'm not from a business background, and I'm sure some of the listeners might not be. So when you say scaling, what do you actually mean by scaling?
Good point. Because that's So that's a key fundamental value of like the venture capital model. So say for instance, let's say two guys have a plumbing business. Like Bobby has a plumbing business and Lamar has a plumbing business.
Mm-hmm.
So Bobby's more traditional. He will be our non-scale option because Bobby just is like, I know how to plumb. I'm a plumber and I'm going to start this plumbing business and I just take on clients as they go. So as many jobs as I
Sound
can
like
get out of it.
yeah. So mine was unscalable because it was me. Yeah.
Correct. So that's Bobby. Bobby's not necessarily going to scale. Bobby's going to work. Bobby's basically got a job that he owns. So Bobby's
Owns his
not,
job. Yeah.
he owns his job.
Most
So,
entrepreneurs own their job, unfortunately.
so Bobby's not going to scale. But Lamar over here, Lamar is going to scale. Lamar is going to come to his business and say, I'm going to set up a system that it's going to be easy enough for me to service 10 plumbing jobs or 10 million plumbing jobs. It's going to be just as easy. Lamar is going to say, okay, a plumbing job takes, say, 5 hours of somebody's time, 1 hour to go, 3 hours to plumb, 1 hour to come back. So he's going to figure that out. And he's going to say, okay, well, I'm going to get 3 people. And that means 3 people can do 6 jobs a day. But Lamar himself is never going to go do a job. He's going to say, for every 2 jobs, I get a person and that person goes out. And so if Lamar always has a model where he's using resources to do the work, today Lamar has 10. And so that means he just needs 5 people, but he still sits in the same chair and does the same amount of work. Tomorrow, if it's 100, that just means he gets 50 people, but he sits in the same chair and does the same amount of work. So that's a principle of being able to scale, is you can accommodate 500 as easy as 5. So if you think about Google, Google.com can accommodate 5 people visiting it as easy as it can 5 million. Right. So if you succeed, where Bobby, if he succeeds, he's just going to drive himself into the ground. He can only do so much. But Lamar, if he gets 10 million with his model, he can service all 10 million. He can go to like what the one term is like a unicorn. The unicorn is a company valued at $1 billion.
Okay.
Bobby can never get to be a unicorn because he can't scale. He would die.
He's trying to do everything himself. And maybe the reason why Bobby would try to do everything himself, it sounds like what you're saying about the gaps that you're noticing with your Urban Startup Accelerator, your Peoples Republic, that people don't understand that. So I'm sure there must be some fear that they have, like you talk about venture capitalists, like what does that entail? What does that mean? Like somebody's going to invest in my business. Like you said, one of the criteria is it needs to be a scalable business. But then they're not sure, well, what does that mean? Do they own my business and shove me out? Like, like I think that's what might stop a person like a boss.
Yeah, that is a danger. Yes, that is. So yes, that does happen to entrepreneurs. That is a danger. That's why you need to have resources and information. I think venture capital is a tool, just like anything else. So it's be like somebody who doesn't know how to drive, they get in a car and say, oh, well, I don't really want to drive because if you get on the highway, that can be dangerous. And it's like, yes, if you don't know how to drive, the highway can be dangerous. To be honest, one of the most striking cases is at one point in time, Steve Jobs got kicked out of Apple Computer.
Yeah.
Because investors, the investors had control and they decided that, hey, get out of here, Steve. And he had to go from the company that he founded. So everybody, and Steve Jobs is a brilliant guy, but even when you're brilliant, you can find yourself in that sort of situation if you're not careful, if you're not knowledgeable. So that is a fear.
So how would you avoid that? How would you avoid, like, but I understand venture capital, they'll get equity. That means they own a piece of your company.
Correct.
These investors will own a certain portion of it. So how do you like protect yourself or stop yourself, or that might not be feasible? How do you do that?
So one term as what they call a term sheet. So the money, the deal exchange, they're all based upon terms. They're predicated on terms. Like, I will take this much funding for this much equity in my business. That's how you come up with the overall valuation. But also there's other terms, whether or not that person has influence over the board or has seats on the board, or there's a number of terms that you can set forth. And that's where the education piece comes in, because it's no different than any other contractual agreement that you would otherwise make, but you really have to read it. Like, so the way you click on like terms and conditions for your Netflix, you can't do that when you're managing a company. You need to because when somebody's investing, they'll have a term sheet, right? And if they're setting the terms are going to be beneficial to them, and they're not going to be beneficial to you. They'll get control. So you would have to definitely have legal counsel, have business counsel, have somebody else read it. Because a lot of times people, when given the opportunity to say have $100,000, $200,000 investment, usually people just go for it. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna, do it.
I got the money. Like, I got the bag.
Yeah, but you really have to negotiate the terms. So you would want some sort of legal counsel or business counsel. A lot of times they'll have programs that are accelerators, like the Peoples Republik, that specifically provide that sort of mentorship to look at what sort of terms you're negotiating, looking at what your valuation of your company is, really understanding the value of your IP or your intellectual property or your current consumer base. Those things can add up to value, but if you don't know how to quantify your value, you can get underchanged and sell too much. So usually you would want to go through some sort of program or have access to some sort of business counsel. And there's like free options. So the Small Business Administration, that's a government office that offers free business counsel. There's inside of that program, there's a program called SCORE, which is Senior Corps of Retired Executives, which are retired business executives that donate their time to look over that sort of term agreement, help you understand how you're evaluating your company. So you'll want to get some resources, get some mentorship, get some backing. Don't go it alone.
These are the things that the People's Republik does.
Yeah, so we're starting out with an online modular curriculum, which are just the basic 101s. It's the basic, like, these are the steps to do a startup, an entrepreneur. We've been taking on a couple of just independent entrepreneurs for like mentoring, just so we kind of do a little bit of almost like market research for setting up our curriculum. So we're planning on doing our first cohort this fall with a dozen founders to go through like a 6-week program to give the fundamentals. So between that cohort program and online resources like checklists and online courses, the aim is to provide like a base level of information. So aspiring entrepreneurs have some idea of the mechanics of what they're getting into and some of the basic steps towards starting a business.
Okay, so if someone wants to be part of your cohort, what is the steps, or what are you actually looking for as far as criteria for your cohort?
It runs the gamut. Most entrepreneurs that we're working with right now have a concept that they're working on, or a business model. So usually someone who's in that space of initial concept and working through an initial business model. But in terms of background, we've got some participants that have master's degrees. One guy has a master's degree from MIT, but then there's some who don't have any college education at all. We've got some that are stateside, but then we've also got two participants abroad. It's one participant in Saudi Arabia and then one participant out of Nigeria. So in terms of geography and demographic, it can really be diverse, but really someone who has that concept of business model, specifically digital. So we specifically focus on digital business models that can scale, whether it be software as a service or digital content models or some sort of e-commerce model, but we focus on digital models that are online, that have that potential for scale.
Okay, good. So those are the criteria that they have. So you also gave a gift for the listeners. If you could just tell us a little bit about the gifts that you give, because I read through them and I say, oh, this is dope. This is what people really need.
Yeah, so I provided two resources. So really, again, those sort of 101 starter kit resources for building a business. One is a business checklist. It's a 15, I think it's 15 or 17 steps that you take in order to establish your business identity or entity. So really just the basic steps that one should be aware of or take into consideration when starting out on a new venture, just to make sure you're protected, just to make sure you're doing all the things in the right order, but also so you have an idea of what you're embarking on. And then the other resource is an online business resource. It's very similar, but specific for online businesses. So when you're starting an online entity, talking about making sure you have your domain registered in the order in which you secure your social media channels, and then the different pieces of like making sure you have online financial processor, making sure you have your CRM platforms in order, and just some of the basic nuts and bolts of establishing an online business specifically.
Wow, that is really huge. I really wish that when I started my business, because I was thinking of, we didn't use the word scale back then. We looked at it as an expansion, how I could expand my business. And I did look at a possibility of bringing in other associate doctors, other associates acupuncturists into the business. But I was so horrible at really being able to verify and qualify the people. It just became a hot mess, to be honest with you. And then I was like, it's like managing cats. So just, you know, like you say, growing your business takes, how do you figure out like hire and how to get those human resources you need in order to make that business grow? Like what is, you know, like the criteria? Because somebody said, I want to do it. And I'll say, sure, come on in. That's a good model.
You know, really it's a skill set in and of itself. One of that's, and just in terms of my background in technology and production, I've been used to managing teams, because usually when you're building out a software project or media project, you've got a big team. So that's something I've always been really focused on, because it's very different than the actual mechanics of what you're doing. Managing people to bake a cake is different from baking a cake.
Correct.
It's two
why
different
I solo practice.
two different things. Two different things. But it's its own practice, and it's one of the things that either you're going to have to master it or hire for it. But I would say two things, well, maybe three things actually. Human resources and managing talent is definitely something like a key component. If you're going to scale, you're going to have to master. The other thing is sales, like people that are afraid to get on the phone or get in front of a client. In order to scale, you're going to have to master sales. And then the other piece is the flip side of sales is customer service. So you're always going to have to manage being in front of that client or consumer. And the funny thing about it is all three of those things are people things.
Yeah.
Like you even with today in technology, like I run a technology business. I'm still shocked at how much depends on me being able to connect with other people.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
And like what you're saying about connecting with people and finding more about people is part of why I was like, wow, people need to hear this. I mean, the information that you share is like, you're dropping gem after gem after gem after gem. I really thank you so much. And I really said, God, I wish I had a Miky when I started my business. Would have been on a whole different trajectory if I had these, because you don't get those resources. You know, like I went to a form of medical school. So in the healthcare, I, you know, got a master's, a doctor in acupuncture, oriental medicine. And then they just said, okay, now go forth. There was no, you know, and I'm, like I said, I'm a people person. So I was able to figure out some of the sales and the marketing and, you know, come up with creative ways to bring clients into my business. So my business always made money, but I was like you said, like Bobby, I was just, you know, I had a, you know, I had a business of a job. And so it, you know, I mean, when you stop working, money doesn't come in. So learning how to do all of that, and like you said, the whole process of managing people, and like you said, getting people to actually do what they say they're going to do is like a whole nother skill set. And I was like, I ain't got time for this. You know, so I went back to I went back to being the solopreneur. So it's like, it's so crucial. I really am telling everybody out there, look, how do people get in touch with you, Miky, if they want to? I know I'm going to send out the links for the gift that you gave, but if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you? And we will put it in the links below.
Yeah, yeah. The easiest way, you know, I'm a big LinkedIn junkie. I'm on LinkedIn basically all day, every day. So yeah, Miky Blak on LinkedIn. I'm the only one there. Otherwise, the venture firm URL is the Republic. It's REPUBLIK.org. So you can reach out there. We're also peoplesrepublic.org, again, peoples and republic with a K.org for the accelerator. But yeah, directly on LinkedIn is easy enough, or either of those two places is good as well.
That is really like, I can't, like I said, wow, this has been valuable, such valuable information. And thanks for doing what you do. Is there anything that you'd like to tell the audience before we go tonight?
No, the only other thing is, again, thank you for what you're doing. And the only other thing is I would highlight, especially in this time, so this post-pandemic time where you don't have the same social gathering places. Like a lot of people are working remote. A lot of what happens socially is remote. And so I think what you're doing is even more relevant, more important in terms of creating online communities. So I thank you for, you know, the opportunity of the platform, and just to highlight, you know, just especially in this time, how key it is that people have access to this sort of information. So just appreciate it.
Okay, and I have one last parting question. Like, everybody's up in arms about AI. Love it, hate it. Everybody's like, AI is coming for me. They're going to take over my life. They're going to, you know, like, what's your thoughts on it? Being like, you're in the tech space and all of that. What's your thoughts on it? And how could you maybe quail some of the anxiety around AI also?
So I'm all for it. So I, one of the best things, one of the best work experiences I had about 10 years ago, I worked on, an IBM team at the Innovation Lab in New York for that. They did the AI projects with Watson, and we would do these like data integrations. We did a data integration, say with US Open, where it figured out, you know, all the sports analytics and stuff. But one of the most incredible integrations I saw was they did a integration with Watson with Sloan Kettering Hospital to be able to assess information in an onboarding or a patient onboarding system. So by the time you saw the doctor, the system was in tune with what your needs might be and already have like recommendations. So it's a collaborative experience. And I think that is the future. I think it is very much like how we use GPS or how we use Google itself. I don't think it's going to replace the human effort, but for what Wikipedia.com or Google.com did for kids that need information for writing your paper, I
Mhm.
think is going to be the same sort of leap forward that these technologies will give us. And so my expectation is actually that it will benefit the creator, that it will benefit the entrepreneur. It'll
Mhm.
benefit that guy Lamar who's trying to scale. And now all of a sudden he has the power of 10 people with a fraction of the cost. And so he can now compete with big guys and entities that he couldn't before. So I
Mm.
think it's going to change the landscape in that regard. But my advice would be to jump all in. Definitely, it's a level setting moment, puts you on par with anybody else. Get in and drive up the motor, get the GPS cranking.
All right. I appreciate that. That is such good advice. When I saw AI, I fell in love with it because I always thought computers just felt cumbersome and extremely slow. And when I saw AI, I was like, that's what I always wanted a computer to do. So I'm all in for it. And one of the things that I'm doing this course called Creation for Money and Purpose. And the reason I'm doing this course is because we all, like you said, we all have this creative, we all have this reason why we're here. Um, and so, like I tell people, I said, if you're in your purpose and you're doing what you could do, AI can't replace that part of
Exactly.
AI can't create, AI can't intuit what you're intuiting and be able to see the things that you're able to see. AI could do it on, like you said, on data that's already there, and it could project from that, but it can't create the way you can create. So I told them, don't worry, you know, as long as you're creating and you're in your purpose, AI is not something to worry about. It becomes a tool.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
this is so great, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And wow, this was really exciting. This was a very exciting interview. All the interviews were good, but I was like, Dad, I wish I had this guy when I got started. So you all, you know, especially like you said, you're looking for like young people that need this information. So you're at the start of your career. You want to start this business. You're not sure. This is the man. This is who you get in touch with. Reach out to him. And even people on our group, the morning meetup, I don't know how many people are even sure exactly what you do.
Yeah,
You
well, I've connected with a few, but yeah, it's
know, overall, and I
um
think they need it a lot of it because that starting point.
yeah. I've connected with a few, but yeah, anybody definitely interested in helping whatever the case may be.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and bless you. I really enjoyed this, and we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you so much.
Same. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Cool.